Hello, good morning, good evening. I'm Dawisson Lopes. It's my pleasure and honor to conduct this session. It's day 2 of our international conference on climate change, the environment, and development in Brazil and China. We have just had a very successful day 1 yesterday when we finally signed the Renmin University of China and UFMG agreement to create a binational research center, which will fund every activity related to a host of academic agendas, namely climate change, the environment, a lot of topics in the humanities, and we are really optimistic about the future of this research agenda. Yesterday, we were happy to witness a senatorial address by Senator Cátia Abreu. She was speaking live from the Brazilian Congress, and she gave her warm welcome to this initiative, and she has demonstrated her enthusiasm about Brazil-China bilateral relations. We have also had a chance to hear some very illuminating words by Chu Guilin, he who is the former Director General of the People's Republic of China's State Administration for Forestry and Pasture. It was very nice to see and to listen to these 2 interventions, after which we have had 2 great contributions by Professors Liu Jinlong and Haoni Rajão, who have given also great talks about their topics, the eco-civilization, the prospects of China's eco-civilization and Brazil's policy towards the environment. It was really nice to be a witness of day 1 of our international conference. So now we move to day 2, and we have a very rich schedule right ahead of us. And we start today with a very special guest, someone whom I'm lucky to be friends with. He's had an impeccable career as a civil servant in Brazil, a brilliant career diplomat who served in many capacities and in very important places like Washington. He was Brazil's ambassador to the United States capital, Washington. He was also Brazil's ambassador to Rome, Italy. He served twice as a state minister in Brazil, first as a minister of the environment and the Amazon. Then he was also Brazil's minister of finance at a time when Brazil was launching the foundations for macroeconomic stabilization. So he is one of the founding fathers of the so-called Plano Real, Plan Real, one on which the Brazilian economy foundations still rely, still today. And on top of it, he has also served for 2 terms as the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, thus accumulating the position of Undersecretary General of the United Nations. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome to this conference Ambassador, Minister, Professor Rubens Recupero. Rubens, you have the floor for 25 minutes. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Dawisson Lopes. I also want to greet my good friend, Professor Aziz Saliba, our friends from China, and all persons who are witnessing and following our procedures. Let me say, first of all, that I gave to my introductory words the title the environment and the future of Brazil-China's relationship. And before talking about the subject, I would like to tell you a little bit about my own connection with the environment. In the 1980s, when we were starting the preparation for the United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development, Rio 92, I was Brazil's envoy to the United Nations in Geneva. So I took part personally in a very close way with the preparations of that conference. During the conference itself in Rio, I became the chairman of the finance committee of Rio 92. The finance committee, as you know from what just took place in Glasgow, is usually the field where you face many difficulties in coming to an agreement, because it deals with the dramatic issue of who will pay the bill, who will pay for the expenditure of fighting global warming. So we, in 1992, we drafted chapter 33 of Agenda 22, the agenda of the United Nations on the Environment. And later I became the first Brazil's minister for the environment and the legal region of that we describe as the Amazon. So I've had some experience in dealing with the issue. Now, turning to the current days, I would like to say that in describing global warming as an existential threat at the Glasgow COP26, China's climate envoy, Xi Zhenhua, raised the issue to where it rightly belongs, to the very center of a major international problems. For the years and decades to come, climate change will become increasingly important to the destinies of each and every country in the world, from tiny oceanic islands threatened by rising ocean levels to major continental countries with populations of hundreds of millions of human beings. There is arguably no other challenge that is so global in nature and lasting in its damaging implications. Even pandemics as COVID-19 do not last forever. They may inflict enormous suffering and lead to the deaths of millions of individuals, as we are witnessing right now. But they last in average from 18 to 22 months, and then they usually recede. That was the fate of the Spanish influenza in 1918, and of all the previous pandemics, including the most multifarious, such as the Black Death. After 2 years, a little more, a little less, they tended to disappear. The great French historian Fernand Braudel would say that pandemics are events, whereas climate change is a profound, structural tendency. The difference between them lies in the time duration. Pandemics are conjunctural, middle-term events while structural tendencies are very deep and long-term shifts that will be with us for centuries. Major historical events, even when they are spectacular, do not necessarily indicate the direction of the things to come. On the contrary, structural, secular tendencies are indeed the forces that shape history in the long run. This is why global warming is set to dominate international relations in the future, much more than anachronistics and futile great power rivalries. As I mentioned before, there is no other issue that is so global in scope and so globalized in its very essence. Indeed, global warming is an atmospheric phenomenon, and there are no national boundaries, no separation in the high atmosphere. When a country emits greenhouse gases, there is no way to make it stay exclusively above the polluter country. It will fluctuate in the atmosphere in all directions. It will affect even the nations that were not responsible for the emissions. In the same way, fighting global warming will depend on the sincere cooperation of all to be effective. Otherwise, the free riders, those that selfishly refuse to give their contribution, will nullify the efforts of the more responsible members of the international community. Of course, contributions will vary according to the historical responsibility of each nation in the long process of almost 3 centuries of cumulative emissions that set out the problem since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It should also vary according to the level of development. For this reason, developing countries such as Brazil and China have always insisted that there is, in dealing with the problem, a common but differentiated responsibility between the old industrialized and advanced economies on the one hand, and emerging developing economies on the other. When we say differentiated responsibility, however, it should not be understood as no responsibility at all. In the existential fight for survival, there is a very special role to be played by continental nations with large populations capable of making a difference at the global level. That is precisely the case of China and Brazil. None of our 2 countries has any responsibility in the historical unleashing of global warming. In per capita terms, neither China nor Brazil compares with the extremely high per capita emissions of large economies like the United States, where waste and exaggerated consumption have been the rule of the so-called American way of life. Nonetheless, China and Brazil are nowadays among the 10 most important greenhouse gases producers on account of the sheer size of their economies and populations, and because they have been actively seeking to develop their productive capacities for the benefit of their peoples. They have, therefore, as large and the responsible developing countries a particular duty of making a strong contribution in the common struggle against the pollution and the global warming. In this respect, they differ in the nature of their respective national challenges. The main cause for emissions in China's case is, as we all know, coal-based electricity production, that is, the energy sector, as well as industry in general and transportation. In the Brazilian situation, on the other hand, most of the damaging emissions come from deforestation and the use of land in agriculture and cattle raising. In a way, provided there is political will on the Brazilian government side, it may prove easier to significantly cut down emissions in Brazil than in China. It would be enough to resume the effective Plano de Ação para a Prevenção e Controle do Desmatamento na Amazônia Legal, that is, the Action Plan for the Prevention and Control of Deforestation in the Amazon and later also in the Cerrado region. That plan was able to reduce deforestation by more than 60% until a few years ago. This, which is no more than simply enforce the laws against illegal deforestation, would set the stage to make Brazil a major source of carbon certificates permits to be traded in carbon markets. In July of this current year, China launched its first carbon trading market that immediately became the largest in the world. It surpassed the European carbon market, and now it controls around 12% of all carbon permits that are traded wide world. With the final approval now in Glasgow, COP26, of the regulation of Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement, a truly universal market for carbon certificates will emerge in the very near future. Brazil is well poised to become one of the largest sources of carbon certificates to meet the growing Chinese demand for carbon trading permits. Brazilian agriculture has the potential to generate an enormous quantity of carbon trading certificates through low carbon and neutral carbon technologies and the process. In addition, there are possibilities of fruitful Chinese-Brazilian cooperation in practically all areas of environment protection. For several years now, China has been in the forefront of advanced and economically accessible technologies for solar and wind energy. A significant percentage of the sun panels and wind turbines installed in Brazil in recent years have been imported from China. There are promising opportunities, particularly in the decisive sector of investments, the weakest point in Brazil's environmental agenda. In that area, one of the major problems lies in the painful lack of information and communication regarding the gigantic opportunities for green investments in Brazil. During the May 2021 Brazil-China Dialogue of Sustainable Agriculture is sponsored by the CEBC, that is the Council of the Business Council for Brazil and China, in association with the Chinese think tank Institute of Finance and Sustainability, IFS. The president of the institute, Ma Jun, mentioned the potential for Chinese green investments in Brazil. He stated that it's not lack of money, but lack of information that has prevented a much more intensive level of Chinese investment in green areas in Brazil. A former member of the Monetary Policy Committee of China's Central Bank and the chairman of China's Green Finance Committee, he mentioned that there are in China now at least 700 green investment funds with very high volumes of financial resources under their management that totally ignore the potential for green investments in Brazil. However, research and knowledge production are certainly the keys for a lasting and satisfactory solution to the global warming challenge. This is why the cooperation program between Renmin and the Federal University of Minas Gerais may prove decisive in helping the two sides to join efforts in the benefit of their peoples and of the well-being of mankind. Brazil has much to contribute in this matter. As we used to say, Brazil is a power to be considered in terms of the environment. We have the largest tropical forest in the world. We have the largest reservoir of fresh water in a world that is lacking more and more in fresh water. Brazil has almost 13% of total fresh water in the world. We have one of the highest reservoir of biodiversity. We have a great potential in terms of biomass, of ethanol, of biological sources of energy. So for many, many, many reasons, Brazil is a perfect complement to China in the struggle, in the global struggle against global warming. So let me conclude by saying that it is really a privilege for me, as a strong believer in the transforming power of science, knowledge, and research, to participate in the launching of this program of cooperation environment, the very essence of the future in the relationship between China and Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Recupero, for your memorable speech. Great intervention. Much appreciated in every aspect. I now hand to my colleague, Liu Jinlong.
Okay.
So please, you have the floor, my dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, the professor. Thank you, Minister. You have give us a wonderful speech, and actually guide our research in the future, joint research in the future. How we can, join, effort for Brazil and China cooperation in the area of the development and environment issues. Okay, let me introduce, our Chinese colleague, Professor Lin Zheng. She's affiliated with the Institute of Geographic Science and Natural Resource Research in Chinese Academy of Science, and chief professor at the University of China, Chinese Academy of Science. Her research is focused on the human ecosystem interaction with special interest on impact assessment, ecological restoration technology, and a multifunctional land use. She's a project leader of National Key Research Laboratory and Development Program on Ecosystem Restoration and the Priority Research Program of the Chinese Academy of Science on Ecological Carrying Capacity Assessment around the Belt and Road countries, and several other national, international collaboration projects. She has, actively participated in the national collaboration activity and developed partnership with organizations in Asia, Europe, and Latin America, and Africa. She has many, very, high value, the products like, books and a chapter and a journal and articles. She is currently the fellow of Scientific Steering Committee of Global Land Program, Director of International Joint Research Center for Environment and Sustainable Development of Mongolia Plateau, Chinese Director of Chinese-Germany Center for Impact Assessment, board members of China Society of National Resource, and the chair of the Committee of Resource Ecology. Okay, Professor Lin, you have the floor. Professor Lin, you have the floor. Professor Zhang.张老师，你可以开始了。
现在是全屏吗？好像不是全屏，是吧？
是不是全屏？对。
啊，我放成全屏。不是我点的不是。在这。PPT。Okay, thank you very much, Professor Liu Jinlun, for your invitation for making some presentations today. Hello, respected ambassador and colleagues in Brazil, and also the colleagues in China. So my topic for presentation is restoring the desertification land. I will introduce some technology and the best practice around the world, and with special focus in China. As we know, land degradation is increasingly becoming a global issue. So according to UNCCD report, so about 3/3 of the dry land in the world is stricken by desertification, and more than 100 countries are affected. So the economic loss for about 14.2 billion USD annually. So it's a very important issue facing the world, and especially facing the poor people in the world. In China, we have about half of our total land area is vulnerable for degradation. So this is the distribution of the grassland and arable land and forest in China. So according to this data, about 41% of the total land area is used for grassland in China. About 19%, nearly 100% of natural grassland has been affected by desertification at different levels. That's why this desertification is a very severe issue in China for ecosystem management and also for the ecological development. We have mostly here in China desertification, soil erosion, and rock desertification issues. which takes up about 22% of the total land area in the country. This map shows the distribution of desertification in China. We see that these three big cycles, red cycles, are the locations of desertification. They are mostly located in the northwest part of China and also in the northern part of China. There are also some areas which are affected by the coexistence of these three kind of degradation issues. So mostly in the North Plateau, in the central part of China, and in the southwest part of China, like Yunnan, Guizhou Plateau. This issue is very significant in China. In China, actually, we have some degradation issues, but as we all know that the government and the different levels have taken a lot of efforts to deal with those degradation issues. And the degradation actually changed over the past 15 years. This map shows that overall, in the past 15 years, the overall situation shows that about more than half of the land area, their degradation issue remain unchanged. And about 22% is improved. That means the degradation issue has been improved and then becoming better compared to 15 years ago. Here I want to let you say that still we have about 12% of the area becoming worsening regarding the degradation. That's why we have still a lot of work to do in the future. Regarding to desertification, we saw that still there are some areas it's becoming worsening over the past years, especially in the Altai region and also in the Tian Shan region in Xinjiang, and also in the northern part of Inner Mongolia, like in the Hongshan Dake and Heqing sandy land. Second part, I would like to make a very brief introduction about the restoration technology, development and evolution around the world. We have summarized this technology change into the three phases. So first phase is before 1950s, and the second is from 50s to 2000, and the third phase is after 2000. Most technology we classified into biologic, engineering, agriculture, policy, and integrated model. So from first phase, the main objective is to ensure the land productivity and the livelihood. And some technologies especially focus on biotechnology and with combination of some engineering technology like the upright sand berry, and especially experience come from Japan and the USA in the early time. And the second phase, the main objective is to restore the degraded land from industry and urban development, because at that time, the many countries focus on, especially developing countries focus on economic development. And some technology especially focus on the rapid development and the use of restoration technology with special focus on the innovation of new materials, emphasis on the biotechnology and the engineering technology and the integrated model. So it's a combination of different technologies for desertification control. Some countries like Israel and Australia, they have been developed some technologies which were very effective in this phase. Third phase is after 2000. The main objective is to make a balance between economic development and ecological restoration to reach the SDGs. Some technology like integration of biotechnology, engineering, and management with focus on the development of location-specific models and best practices. Like some UN organizations like WOCAT has summarized the best practices around the world. So they have series of publications with collection of those best practices. Especially after 2000, China is in a leading place in the world to really do something or develop some technology to control desertification. And some models like Cooked model has been widely recognized by the United Nations, and the experience has been also collected in the UN's report. So third part, I would like to focus on China about application and the effectiveness of restoration technology. This figure shows ecological restoration projects in China. Actually, as shown right after economic reform and opening up the world in late 1970s, China, the government has started some programs, national level programs to restore the degradation of the land resources. Those are the representative programs. For example, the Three Loss and the Yangtze River Shadebed Project, Natural Forest Conservation Program, which started in the 2000, late 1990s and early 2000. And the most famous and the largest program is Green for Green program in China, which started in 2000, around 2000, and still in effect up to now. And then Beijing, Tianjin Wind and Sun South Region Control, and also National Wildlife Protection and so on. So there are a series of programs have been implemented in China. And still there are some planned new programs, especially in the China's 14th five-year development plan. So there will be some new programs coming up. So this is from the central government and initiate the program and down to different levels of governments, like provincial and municipality until the township. It's a nationwide campaign to deal with these degradation issues. Regarding to this successful implementation of the projects, actually the key part is restoration technology, which really plays key role for the restoration. We have made this distribution of technology application in China. So each dot represents one single technology or the technology model. So we saw it's very much concentrated in the area, and those areas are mostly populated area and with the very serious degradation issues. In summary, we found that there are about more than 1,200 technologies used, and those are the single technology, and also 770 models, which is the combination of different technologies. By classification, we have engineering, agriculture, biologic, and also physical chemistry and management strategies, which implies that in China, a lot of efforts have been made to control the desertification in terms of technology development. And then we have this evolution of technology. That means technology development changed according to different degradation issues and also in different economic development stage. In summary, we found that the total number of technology increasing over the time. and from the use of single technology to the multiple or combination of different technologies, and also from biotechnology use towards integrated. And especially currently, we have moved to the combination of restoration with the regional sustainable development goals. So this diagram shows in the early 20th century, there are different, the technology is mostly dominated by the biotechnology. And up to now, it's more or less it's integrated. This is a yellow column shows that the increasing number of integration of different technologies for the control of desertification. In China, we have some practices which is effective for control desertification. For example, sand barriers is one of them. So the photos in the bottom of this slide show different kind of sand barriers. Of course, in this figure time zone, we show that actually at the early time, different countries developed different kind of sand barriers. For example, in Germany, Denmark, and then Egypt, and also former Soviet Union, and other countries in Israel. But after 1960s, China was faster in developing different kind of sand barriers for this kind of technology for use. And the materials also change from time to time. So in very early time, actually use some very traditional biomass, like the plant straws or branches, and gradually use some new environment-friendly materials, some plastic wraps, and also some nano and this kind of especially chemical materials, which is not environment friendly. Currently, actually, the main focus is development of high technology environment friendly materials. For example, use some polyacid fiber mechanization and so on. So which mostly environment concerns. Different drivers also play role in different time for using different technology. So early time actually is most the demand. So it's because of degradation. So there were very high demands for the restoration, and gradually in current time, mostly demand plus economic development plus technology. Innovations and plus SDGs. So it's more integrated, not only environment rehabilitation, but also concern economic development and the local demand. And this is also the example for sand barriers, very specific technology in different time in China development. So I would like to point out this straw checkboard barriers, which was developed in late 1950s in China. So now it's still used very widely in China and also in other countries like Kazakhstan. So they have very close collaboration with Chinese companies to construct this straw checkboard. Of course, they are using some different materials as well to build these barriers to prevent sand erosion. And this is an example in some case study areas or in panels in China I would like to share with you. So one is a case study in the Qinghai Tibet plateau. So this is a location map. This is mostly the grassland, but facing very serious degradation. of grassland. They have some programs implemented from the government, supported by the government. First one is grazing prohibition by building this fencing. So fencing inclusion of the grazing. So because of this, the herders, they are losing from their grazing activities, but the government provides some subsidies to them in order to help their income and livelihood. Actually, this is very successful example, because in the second year, we can see from the right bottom photo that the grass is growing very good. So the coverage of the grassland increased very fast. And the second one is now teenage grass planting, because the natural grassland, the rehabilitation is slow and also very vulnerable to climate change. So in the area, in the Qinghai Tibet plateau, so they plant some artificial plantation of grassland. So this would be a very compromised method for the natural grassland recovery through some artificial activities. And this also we can see from this map. So this artificial grassland field looks much better than not applied this artificial plantation technology. And the third one is the rats control program, because in the plateau there are some very special rats in the area. So they really damage the grassland. For example, the plateau picas, grassland and the seeds, they root the seeds of grass. So the damage, some chemical and biological control methods are both used for this purpose. And then there's also livestock shedding program, which are supported by the local governments. So herders, they can build these shadows for the animals. So in the winter time, the animals could be stay in this shadow, and they have some feeds by the herders to feed them. They can also, the government also provide subsidies for this grazing of animals, not only to build this shed. So this is a very successful program. And then harvest in October. So this manually artificial grass. So we can see that they grow much better than the natural grassland. So that means natural activities and then the artificial activities can be combined to have better effects. And then also there's ecological migration program to move the people if the natural environment is very harsh. So government provide subsidy or provide housing and some facilities to those herders. They can migrate to this new area, and they can also have some jobs, like some and making some handicrafts or some weaving factory, so they could get some income. We also found that different technology has different effects. First one, we identified in the Qinghai Tibet plateau. So they have 5 different models adapted by the herders. Those are the different models, and the number of households who applied those different models. A, B, C, D, E, we have this. So A is a single inclusion of grassland, and B is grazing prohibition. And the C, D is a combination of inclusion and then plus deratization. And the D and E is more integrated, plus grass seedling and also plus some worm sheds and cross-foraging cultivation. We made some assessment of the effects of those models from different, using different indicators. So first one, we found that the grassland area adopting grazing prohibition approach ranked the first. We can see this different area. And also they have some effects on grassland coverage. From high to no coverage, we found mostly the increased coverage area is mostly in the area which with high grassland coverage, and the decreased coverage area is mostly for the no coverage places. That means good place become more good, much better, and the worst place maybe still need to be improved. Another indicator is the grassland coverage change. So this coverage actually change from time to time, from year to year, because this area is very sensitive to the climate change. It very much depend on the natural rainfall and the climate change. Another aspect is on the structure and number of livelihood. We can say the more integrated strategies like the approach D, actually in this the herders family, they use this combination of technology. They have more number of households than the others. And regarding to the income, actually the last model is the use of different technologies, a combination of different technology used. They have highest income compared to rest of the 4 models, because they also have activities to get income from the collection of Tibetan medicine. This we say that this we consider it's very good for the health. And those are some activities from the industry, because herders they can find some more, they could have more time and involve in different activities to get more income. And apart from Tibet plateau example, I would like to also very briefly present some example from the Beijing, Tianjin sandstorm source control. This is the location of the area, so have different strategies, fencing, ecological bags, and artificial reforestation, and wind prevention on grassland. This example from the Tengge Desert in northwest China in this part. The left side picture shows that different strategies or technology will have different effects on the grassland coverage. So the bottom of this photo says that at the beginning of the year, they construct some straw barriers, but still some sand flowing from place to place. But after 30 years or about 30 years, so up left hand, we can see that this picture, they have some very good coverage of the grassland. And then this example is in Inner Mongolia, in Xilingo. It's the largest grassland in China regarding to the grazing of animals. We have before and after using different strategies like fencing and grass prohibition. We see the big difference, and agroforestry also are very widely used in the area. And the last part I would like to say the issues and the challenges. So first one is the location-specific restoration technology is very much demanded in China, because at the beginning we have somehow one technology fits all, but they cause some problems. In the next step, we would like to also focus on this location-specific and monitor evaluation of the current restoration technology. As I have presented, that there are not of more than 2,000 technologies, but we need to know which one is better than the others. So we need to make evaluation and make selection of the most suitable technology. This is the work they are working currently. And also we need to concern also economic development. we need to integrate this development into the restoration. And we need international joint actions. We need also to learn actually very successful examples from Brazil, like biodiversity protection. And the next steps, actually, we need also make some restoration models, because from the example we saw that the most effective technology is a combination of different technologies. We call it models. We need to develop these models. We need to further demonstrate those models in different areas of China. And lastly, we need to also consider technology transfer, to which technology in China can be used to transfer to other countries, and which other countries' successful or best practices could be used, adopted in China. So we are very look forward to some collaboration with Brazil colleagues in this regard. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Lin. Thank you very much.
So now we are having a quick Q&A session. And I invite my friend Liu Jinglong, who is the expert in the room. So I hand over to you again. You can start with your questions. Jinglong, would you prefer myself to do it? I'm afraid he cannot hear me. Okay, I thank you very much, Professor Lin Zhen and Ambassador Rubens Recupero, for your beautifully structured interventions, very informative ones. I would just pose one question, and I would be very much interested in hearing your impressions about the latest event we have just had in Glasgow, the COP26. So how optimistic or how pessimistic are you with regard to the follow-up? So where we are going now from here? Ambassador Recupero.
Well, thank you very much, Dawisson. I believe that Glasgow was in not a failure as we had in Copenhagen in 2009, but it didn't reach the level of expectations that had been created in Paris in 2015. So the results in Glasgow were somewhere in the middle. I would say that we should not underestimate some of the achievements, and I would particularly point out the agreement to regulate Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. The final agreement on this matter will open the way for the establishment of a truly universal carbon permits trading market, and that this will be particularly promising for countries like Brazil. I would also like to stress the agreement in principle to cut down in 30% of emissions of methane, but it was an agreement relatively lacking in details. We still don't know how countries intend to fully comply with this engagement of a cut down methane by 30%. In the case of Brazil, for instance, it will be quite a challenge because most of the emissions in Brazil come from cattle raising, and it is possible to reduce the emissions, but you have to substantially improve in terms of techniques. The other agreement regarding coal is also a promising one, but I have the impression that it will have to wait a little longer because the coincidence of Glasgow with the moment when the world is finally coming out of the pandemic of the COVID-19 has created a sort of additional difficulty for cutting down on coal and on fossil fuels in general, because as we all know, after 2 years of suppressed demand for energy is booming right now. So the timing is not the right one. Many countries now are increasing the rate of use of coal, of oil, of gas, because the high prices of energy and the resumption of production. So from that point of view, I believe it was wise to make an agreement in principle and then to convene a new meeting next year in South Africa, hopefully at a moment when the current problems of supply chains and pent-up demand for energy will already be normalized. As a matter of fact, I believe that one of the high points of the meeting was the declaration by China and the United States that the two countries are ready to cooperate, to join forces in fighting climate change. I think this declaration is a major hope for mankind for two main reasons. One, of course, is specifically related to the subject matter of the environment, because this is an area where cooperation between China and the United States is a must. If we don't have this cooperation, even if the others move in the same direction, it will make not a substantial difference. So it is a sort of a precondition, a preliminary condition of any progress in this area. So this would be the first reason. The second reason is a broader one. I strongly believe that China and the US have much to gain in cooperation, and it would be a pity if with so many concrete problems that we have in the world, not only related to climate change, but also to social matters, the improvement of preparation of the world system to fight future pandemics, problems of poverty, of misery, of civil wars. With so many conflicts that we are witnessing in the world, it would be a waste of energy, a waste of efforts, if we would see the world moving towards a sort of a new increase in rivalry between the two major powers. So I took much encouragement from this declaration, and I would say that in Glasgow, we were able to get what was possible. It was not the desirable, but it was realistically what could be achievable at that moment because of all the reasons I gave. And I do hope that now, next year, countries will make an additional effort to improve in their national determined contributions for fighting global warming. This is my evaluation of the Glasgow COP26, a sort of a moderate optimism.
Thank you, Ruben. Thanks, Ambassador. You are very, okay, great.
Professor Liu Jinlong, would you like to add something? Because Professor Aziz, our dear friend, whose presence in the room I now acknowledge, Professor Aziz Saliba. He's the Dean for International Affairs at UFMG, and he's got one question, I guess, for Ambassador Rubens Recupero, right?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Dawisson Lopes, for the kind acknowledgement, and also I would like to take this opportunity to salute our friends in the room, especially Ambassador Rubens Recupero. It's always a pleasure to listen to him, and I would like to say that I learned a great deal from Professor Lei. I know very little about desertification, but now my ignorance has diminished, even if a small bit, from your great presentation. Professor Recupero, Ambassador Recupero, I mean, I can
Professor
salute.
Is better. I am a professor.
I can salute you in many capacities. You are one of the most important, I could say, you have a very important role in our contemporary history in Brazil. So it's an honor to have you here with us in this morning from a Brazilian perspective, or tonight from a Chinese perspective. But I am very interested to take advantage of your experience, of your great experience, of your knowledge of international relations, and especially of Brazilian relations, to know what are the main barriers in the governmental cooperation between Brazil and China. You discussed the cooperation in tackling global warming challenges, but I'm thinking about an even broader perspective. Are there competing agendas that may perhaps prevent us from cooperating? Is mutual misunderstanding a problem in our cooperation? And finally, how can we overcome such barriers? Once again, thank you very much for your great lecture.
Well, thank you for the question. I must say very frankly that I see no obstacle, no problem, no real difficulty in fostering Brazil-China cooperation. In recent months, we saw a number of occasions when there was some misunderstanding. I would say particularly on the part of the Brazilian government, the current Brazilian government, because perhaps of political reasons. But fortunately, those difficulties seem to have been left behind. In recent months, I have noticed a much more positive tone in the statements and declarations of all members of the Brazilian government. To be frank, from the start, there were sectors of the Brazilian government that were much more aware of the benefits of the cooperation than others. For instance, the Ministry of Agriculture has always been in the forefront of the close cooperation of China. The Ministry of Infrastructure, because in all those areas, we know that China is now the best hope for Brazil in terms of bilateral trade and also in terms of a source of investment in infrastructure. There were a few other areas that lagged behind. I'm not habilitated, I'm not a person who could speak for the government because I have no links to the current government. But I would say that the changes that we witness in the Brazilian government composition were very positive. The substitution of the former Minister of Foreign Relations and the nomination of a professional diplomat, Mr. Carlos França, Ambassador França, who is a strong believer in Brazil's China cooperation, helped a lot. You remember that one of the first actions taken by Ambassador França was to call up in the phone his counterpart, the Minister of Foreign Relations of China. And since then, there was a clear improvement. I would say also that another improvement was the visit to China by the Minister of Communications, the man who is in charge of the 5G technology. So all those steps are concrete measures that have improved the climate of cooperation. Because I must say that there is no reason whatsoever for the two countries to have any difference in opinion. We have the same approach to problems of development. In international fora, we generally stand side by side. We have the same opinion about the common but differentiated responsibility in fighting global warming. And in concrete terms, the fact is that the best thing that happened to Brazil in many years was the rise of China, because it was the rise of China that has created growing demand for commodities that Brazil exports. If Brazil now has a healthy surplus in bilateral trade and in international trade in general, it's largely thanks to China. About 70% of our surplus comes from China. And China is the major source of investment also in electricity distribution, in many areas of investment in Brazil. So we have every concrete reason to wish for a closer partnership we have no political problems whatsoever. Our two peoples are friendly toward each other. And you see where I really consider that we have an enormous potential is in what you are doing at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, that is in research, in contributing to have a concrete projects of joint research with China, because China is now in the forefront of advanced technologies in many fields, especially in artificial intelligence. In artificial intelligence, no other country has made so many progress as China, and we need that help. We are not at the same level as the Chinese. We have good scientists, we have good programs, but we have everything to gain if we can join efforts with Chinese science and Chinese technology. So this is an area where I think the future will be bright. And I really commend you in UFMG for taking the initiative of launching this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is the perfect message to conclude the first half of our session. Thank you very much, Ambassador Recupero, Professor Lin Jen. And now, as we keep alternating Brazilian and Chinese speakers, I invite to have the floor my dear colleague, Professor Klaus Dalgaard. Is Klaus inside the room? Yes, he is.
Yes, hello.
So Professor Dalgaard, he is a former professor of political science at UFMG, now a professor of international relations at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. He has extensively published articles in the field of environmental governance and energy governance, the geopolitics of energy. And he's recently published a book on this topic, the Brazilian energy diplomacy, a topic about which I think he will be speaking for the next 25 minutes. Professor Dalgaard, thank you so much for accepting this invitation. My honor to have you joining this conference. You have the floor for 25 minutes now.
Well, thank you very much, Davison. And first of all, I'd like to say good morning or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. I'd like to thank the opportunity to be here talking to you, and in particular to thank Professor Davison and Professor Jin Long for the kind invitation to be here. Now, as Professor Davison mentioned, today I'm going to briefly talk about what I consider to be one of the most unique Brazilian foreign policy initiatives of the last 20 years, namely Brazil's so-called ethanol or biofuels diplomacy, which basically means it consists of a foreign policy strategy to disseminate the production and consumption of biofuels to other countries who are seeking this as a means to ensure their energy security. Now, the reason why I'd like to talk about this topic in particular is that it has been recently brought back into the spotlight, having been discussed during the COP26 meeting in Glasgow earlier this month. So it's also tie-ins to some of the things that Ambassador Recupero has talked about when mentioning COP26 meetings. Now, obviously, this is not the first time that biofuels diplomacy has been touched on by the Brazilian governments. Obviously, this has been a big part of Brazil's foreign policy in this millennium. But the first attempts, however, to promote Brazilian biofuels abroad were first undertaken by the state government of São Paulo in the late 1980s as what we might call sub-state actor diplomacy. But it was not until the early 2000s, however, that promoting biofuels in other countries became part of the Brazilian federal government's foreign policy. And the opportunity for Brazil's ethanol diplomacy at the time was an international energy context, which was plagued by steadily rising oil prices in the face of growing populations in developing countries, concerns over the future availability of fossil fuels and their effect on the environment, as well as the reliability of having a large portion of the world's energy needs provided by a very limited number of countries. So in other words, the world in the early years of the current millennium was faced once again, like it was in the 1970s after the two oil crises, with threats to global energy security. Threats that Brazil had overcome in the 1970s with its national alcohol program policy, whose experience could benefit other countries faced with similar energy security challenges, which were characteristics at the start of the millennium. Now, so it was within this context that Brazil's foreign policy strategy to disseminate the production and consumption of biofuels was situated. And during the first years of the Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva government, which started in 2003 and went on to 2010. But in the first years, especially in the first administration, there was hardly a presidential trip abroad or a visit by foreign dignitaries to Brazil, in which former President Lula did not mention Brazil's successful history and experience with ethanol production. And he repeatedly recalled the need to tackle the energy security challenges that the world faced at the time, listing the advantages of adopting biofuels in his speeches and declarations. So first of all, these products constitute renewable energy alternatives, which allow us to diversify the world's energy supply while lessening the undesirable dependency on a limited number of energy, and particularly petroleum, a limited number of sources and supplies. But secondly, and very importantly, these products also help protect the environment by both emitting fewer greenhouse gases and also by using agricultural waste and depleted land. So particularly in comparison to petroleum-derived fuels, there is this environmental advantage to biofuels. And thirdly, these biomass products are also considered development tools, especially a rural development with a strong positive impact on society, because given the abundance and variety of possible feedstocks to produce biofuels, and as well as the versatility of the technology employed, these products, they facilitate both job creation on small farms and family farms, as well as large farms, and related industries across the entire biofuel production chain. And they also generate export revenue for countries that in many cases might depend on a single export commodity and which might lack energy resources because of the tight oil market of the early 2000s. So these are the what we can consider the core of the message that was spread wherever then President Lula went in the world, or to all those who visited in Brazil, in conjunction with other instruments and subsequent strategies, of course. All of this has constituted the core of what has been called Brazil's biofuels diplomacy or ethanol diplomacy. So Brazil had many overlapping objectives in this foreign policy initiative, which we dub ethanol diplomacy, which includes obviously creating new export markets for Brazilian biofuel-related products, but also enhancing energy security in terms of reducing dependence on expensive imported oil, limiting greenhouse gas emissions, improving the environment by substituting lead additives in gasoline, as well as I mentioned, creating jobs in rural communities and developing foreign countries. However, the overarching goal of Brazil's ethanol diplomacy has been to transform ethanol and other biofuels, but ethanol in particular, into a globally traded commodity. In other words, it is to create an international market where ethanol is traded freely without barriers. So in order to create this market, however, more countries need to produce ethanol or other biofuels, since Brazil obviously is unable to supply global demand for biofuels, while potential importers are unwilling to substitute their dependence on unreliable petroleum supply for dependence on a single or a few suppliers of biofuels. So the Brazilian government strategy in ethanol diplomacy has to be careful not to replicate the dependence on a small number of suppliers that exists in the petroleum international market. So the main strategy pursued, therefore, by the Brazilian government to accomplish this goal, of commoditizing ethanol, was to encourage and assist other countries to use and to produce their own biofuels by promoting its use to these countries and transferring the technology and know-how and best practices to do so. Now, this was the core idea behind Brazil's ethanol diplomacy, particularly during the first Lula government and start of the second. But it's important to say that while this foreign policy initiative showed great promise in its early years, over time, however, it lost momentum. And there are two important domestic reasons that help explain the disappointing results of Brazil's ethanol diplomacy. So first was the discovery of massive offshore oil reserves in the so-called pre-salt layer in the late months of the year 2007, which has dominated Brazil's energy policy debates in the years since. And secondly, this shift in Brazil's energy policy priority was even more pronounced after President Lula's successor, Dilma Rousseff, was elected in 2010 and assumed the presidency in 2011. Now, what was a foreign policy priority during most of the Lula administration was completely deprioritized, if not outright relinquished in President Rousseff's government, not only in her foreign policy, but also domestically. Because by subsidizing gasoline prices in detriment of ethanol fuel's ability to compete with gasoline, the Rousseff administration clearly indicated a higher interest in fossil fuels than renewable energy. And also no longer being sustained with the political priority afforded by presidential diplomacy, the Rousseff administration saw Brazil's ethanol diplomacy relegated to the day-to-day bureaucratic continuity of those initiatives that had already been set in motion previously. So after this, unfortunately, in my view, Brazil's ethanol diplomacy completely lost momentum as other mostly domestic priorities took over the Brazilian government's agenda since then. However, in recent times, very recent times, the Brazilian government has started talking about taking up its dormant ethanol diplomacy once more, most notably during the COP26 meeting in Glasgow this month. However, the context in which Brazil's ethanol diplomacy took place in the 2000s is quite different from the context it would or might take place in today. So I would like to talk a bit about what lessons can we learn from the past and how can we use those to evaluate the future challenges and possibilities for Brazil's ethanol diplomacy. And here, it's very important to understand that the utility or success of any given foreign policy initiative is very dependent on the context in which it takes place. And this makes it essential to understand the context in which Brazil's ethanol diplomacy took place in order to properly assess it. Moreover, we should also remember that the power of any given foreign policy instrument may also change over time, especially as the context changes. Now, since ethanol diplomacy is a strategy meant to address energy security, amongst other things, then we must understand how the international energy context of the 2000s was particularly auspicious for energy diplomacy before thinking about how the context is different today. So it is instructive to try to see these two contexts 20 years apart, roughly, in terms of energy security, which includes several elements, including availability, affordability, and sustainability, as well as other elements that I won't be touching on today. So first, thinking about the availability of energy in the 2000s versus today, first, it's important to note and to remember that in the early 2000s, there were very real and serious concerns, which today we know to be unfounded, over what is called peak oil. Namely, this is a concept in petroleum engineering that talks about the point at which a production of petroleum will reach a peak and then slowly dwindle after that, after the world, once the world has explored roughly half of oil reserves. So this concept predicts that at some point, the world will have consumed half of the existing oil on the planet. And after that, production will reach a plateau and then slowly dwindle after that. Now, this proved to be mistaken. But there were very real fears about that in the early 2000s, which helped put pressure on the price of oil. And there were very real fears that we might be entering into a phase of the end of oil in terms of availability, which then led to a very strong and urgent drive to find renewable energy, especially in the transportation sector, in order to substitute petroleum, which dominates with more than 90% the transportation sector in terms of energy, whereas most other sectors or have energy sectors have appropriate substitutes in the renewable fields. I mean, you can generate electricity with a varied number of energy sources, but transportation is still dominated by petroleum. So the need to substitute fossil fuels in the transportation sector is very urgent, and biofuels appeared as a way to do this, especially in light of that fear that the world was running out of petroleum. Today, however, the situation is much different. As the price of oil increased, that led to investments in new production, new alternatives to petroleum, and new production and exploration as well. And new petroleum reserves are found, including in Brazil, and also other places around the world. New technologies to extract petroleum that before was economically unviable also appeared, like in the Canadian tar sands. So long story short, the high oil prices led to investments which found new ways to explore and produce petroleum. So in other words, the prediction that the world was reaching peak oil proved to be wrong. There is plenty of oil left. And today, what I would consider in terms of availability, the problem that the world faces is not a problem of peak oil or peak oil production, after which it starts waning and going down due to lack of availability, but a problem of what we might call peak demand or peak consumption. As countries want to go off fossil fuels eventually, especially in light of the threats of climate change and the need to curb greenhouse gases, of which fossil fuel consumption is responsible for roughly 3/4 of emissions globally, give or take a few percent. So given many countries' targets to become carbon neutral, or at the very least to significantly reduce their carbon emissions, the plan is for countries to reduce their consumption of fossil fuels, including petroleum, over the next 20 to 30 years, depending on the target dates, be it 2040 or 2050. So in other words, there's plenty of oil to go around. However, the mid to long-term tendency is for countries to voluntarily consume less petroleum. So availability of petroleum is not an issue. So even though oil prices are currently right now relatively high, because production, which was curtailed during the pandemic, as consumption and demand patterns fell drastically in the last 2 years, production has not yet had time to catch up with the demand that has been repressed by the pandemic and is now booming again, as Ambassador Hikupuru mentioned. So basically, we had a period during the pandemic of repressed demand. So demand fell significantly, and then production also fell, because we even had a very brief period in which oil in the futures market had negative values. People were paying to get rid of oil stocks. But now this demand is picking up again, and obviously oil production doesn't come online again that fast, so it's still catching up. But in the medium term, we can expect oil producers to produce as much as possible, I believe, before carbon neutrality target dates are reached around the world, as I said, around 2040 or 2050. So the analogy I would make here is one of British pubs. I studied in the United Kingdom and lived there for 13 years. And I don't know if you are familiar with the United Kingdom, but at least when I lived there, when you're in a pub or a bar and it's around 10:45 p.m., the bartender rings a little bell and yells out last orders to everyone, because they cannot or could not, at least at the time, sell alcohol after 11 p.m. So what happened every single time, no matter the size of the pub, that the bartender rings the bell, everyone, literally everyone or almost everyone, rushes to the bar and orders 3 pints, which is each 3 glasses of a half liter each of beer, and hold it in their hands to drink after 11. So this is the analogy I think we can make with oil production, seeing as the last orders have been rung with ambitions and target dates around 2040 or 2050, depending on the countries, to become carbon neutral. So oil producing countries and private oil companies are painfully aware of this deadline, so they're producing as much as possible before countries start cutting their or take very serious measures to achieve carbon neutrality. So it's a race against the clock to produce as much as possible before the world starts making very serious efforts to stop consuming petroleum. So talking in terms of affordability, then, biofuels were an economically attractive substitute to petroleum-based transportation fuels during most of the 2000s, when the barrel of oil cost up to $140 at its peak in July of 2008. So the issue of the price of the main competitor to biofuels is, namely gasoline, which is made from petroleum, is very important indeed. So biofuels are at their most attractive when oil prices are high. However, Brazil's ethanol diplomacy suffered from structural changes to the international context, especially the abrupt drops in the prices of oil, first during the after the 2008 financial crisis, but after which the price picked up a bit again, but especially after the abrupt drop of the price of oil in the second half of 2014, when the US shale revolution really started coming online. So Brazil's strategy to promote biofuels abroad, and particularly in developing countries which were and are dependent on oil imports, was built on the argument that biofuels were a solution to the multiple threats posed to energy security under the previous exorbitant oil price scenario. And after 2014, when no longer faced with hefty oil import bills, the urgency to substitute oil consumption for biofuels has diminished significantly. And if fossil fuels remain too cheap for renewables to compete with, we may expect a drop in investments in renewable energy, as was the case with the wave of investments in alternative energy resources that happened after the oil shocks of the 1970s, which declined significantly after oil prices dropped in the mid-1980s. Now, unlike the 1970s, however, concern about the environmental impact of energy use and its overwhelming contribution to climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions has a much more important political importance and urgency today than it did after the oil crisis of the 1970s, which were mostly an economic problem and not predominantly a climactic problem as well, as we see today. Therefore, the opportunities presented by recent lower oil prices should, and perhaps future oil prices as well, as countries rush to produce, oil producers rush to produce as much as possible before 2040 or 2050, when the world is seeking to become carbon neutral. So even then, I believe that the lower oil prices should not diminish the drive toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions and investing in renewable energy technologies. It could well be that the environmental concern displayed by several governments will help maintain the interest and investment in renewable energy sources, even if fossil fuel prices are low. We can consequently expect to see, I think, a surge of technological innovation in renewable energy in the future, because we need to simultaneously tackle energy security and climate change at the same time, because you cannot tackle these two issues separately, especially considering the inextricable link between the two, given that globally speaking, roughly 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change are emitted by the way in which we produce and consume energy. And here I'd like to bring back the topic to the main topic, that one particular energy resource that stands out here as a means to tackle simultaneously energy security and climate change is ethanol and other biofuels, especially considering their applicability in transportation, the only sector where alternatives have not been able to replace petroleum on a sufficiently large scale. And given the need to curb greenhouse gas emissions and the huge projected rise in car ownership in the developing world, combined with the concern that future oil supplies may not be able to meet such a steep surge in demand, then biofuels seem like a very attractive alternative energy source, especially in this sector. And I'm not sure whether Brazil's ethanol diplomacy will truly be brought back to the center stage of Brazilian foreign policy and Brazilian proposals to contribute to the Paris Climate Accord and to climate change in general. But the potential is there for sure. And I for one, am quite glad that it has been brought back to attention, even if it was only mentioned briefly in COP26. And definitely think that there is potential, although there are many impediments and challenges as well, for biofuels to make a contribution to climate change, especially in light of the overwhelming dominance that petroleum has in the transportation sector, and the limited ability to substitute on such a huge scale petroleum use with electric cars, which are also a solution, but nowhere near close enough to be able to make a huge impact considering the vast amount of cars running on fossil fuels existing today, and the projected rise in automobile ownership around the world, especially in the developing world, including Brazil and China. So I'm not too sure how much of my time I've used, or if I've overtaken it. If there's some time left, I would like to leave that available for talk and discussions in the Q&A. So with that, I thank you all for your attention and look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dalgaard, for bringing up such a timely topic for our discussion in such a brilliant way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now pass the floor to my colleague, Liu Jinglong.
Yes.
So
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Davis?
perfect.
Okay, great. Great. Thanks. Okay, as our last speaker, Dr. Wang Ke. He's a professor from the School of Environment and Natural Resource, Renmin University of China. And he's a research fellow of Academy of Carbon Peak and Neutrality. Actually, it's a very new institute in Renmin University of China. And his main research area are climate change economics, carbon neutral economic analysis, energy and environment economic modeling, and global environment governance. Okay, he published a lot of a journal article and have involved in many international cooperation projects. Actually, he's very familiar with Chinese negotiation team for supporting climate change, climate change negotiation internationally. Okay, Professor Wang, you have the floor. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, the Professor Liu's the introduction, and I'm very happy to participate in today's discussion. And it's just follow, it's the ambassadors the comments about the China and the Brazil's the future's potential and in the climate change and cooperation. And also, I agree that he said that the two countries are very complementary and in this issue. So that today, and I will to provide the China's perspective and first introduce the China's carbon neutrality target and the long-term strategies, the transition path, and also the latest the policy progress. And then based on the China's the carbon neutrality strategy and target, and talking about the possible the futures the cooperation between China and the other developing countries, especially like the Brazil, this kind of the large developing countries, and in these issues. We all know that in China, the CPC, the Central Committee, and also our state council have the launched, the target for the carbon neutrality, and we have the target for the 2025, 2030, and then 2060. Now we all know that before the 2030 China and commit to reach peak, and by the 2060, and then you will reach the carbon neutrality, and also the share of the non-fossil fuel and will be over the 80%. Then this is the China's target, and the last month China government also submit this strategies to the UNFCCC and as the long-term strategies of the mid-centuries for this. So that is this is China's official target for this. But we all know that it's comparing with the other developing country, China's the peak target maybe, and in terms of the development level, especially consider about the GDP per capita, that we all know this China will reach peak around maybe the $15,000, and but it's the most developed countries, they have reached peak and around the more than 20 and nearly the $30,000 US dollar. So that is we call it China's the maybe will reach the earlier peaks from the development level, the perspective, but the peak level and will also lower, and that is shows China's this is the contribution. But this is compared the US and China. It's from the EU. They also have some long time, and so for stability of the emissions, and then they had decreased, and there is lasted nearly 60 to 70 years. But China when reached peak and will decline rapidly, and it's in very short time. So that mostly is the shortest time span for China from the carbon peak to the carbon neutrality. This is, it's also will face the huge challenges, and for China to realize this target for this. So that is we have to suggest is based on some of the modeling exercise, and to discuss the possibles the time path for China to achieve its carbon neutrality goal. So that is before 2030, and they are slowly the increase. But then maybe we think we'll no more than 5 years, and they will stable with a slight decline. Then we must to experience maybe the 15 years and the very rapidly the declines, and then it's the last 10 years towards the carbon neutrality. That means the steadily the decline for this. So that is show. But we will. Our question is whether it is possible. That is because they are the related, and then with according to our research, we think it's possible because recently most of the China's high carbon infrastructures, such as the coal power plants, and also it's the infrastructures for the cement, for the iron steel, and most of them have built in the last 10 years. So that is after the 20 to 30 years, then the high carbon infrastructure will naturally phase out for this. So that is we think between the 2035 to 2050 will the opportunities, the room for China to phase out this kind of the high carbon infrastructure. And then that means for example, the renewable, the wind and solar, and also EV, and also the hydrogen, just like this, they will have more than nearly 20 to 30, maybe 20 years, and to this is for these new technologies and for them the opportunities, and to it's to advance, and then to measure the more fastly, and for this. So that is we're talking about the likely time path for China to achieve its carbon neutrality is the goal. And then we identify that is the 5 the higher priorities areas, and then suggest some of the cross-cutting decarbonization strategies to supporting China's carbon neutrality target. That is we also is focus on the energy efficiency, also the recycle, the circular economy. That means we are promoting the sustainable demand. And second is the decarbonization, the electricity generation. So just that you also that is China's target is more than 80% of the non-fossil fuel in the primary energies, the consumptions. And then, but another the options is the electrifying the end use sectors. That is to increase the electrification rate and in all the end use sectors. And then switching to the low carbon fuels, like the hydrogen and the biomass in the industry and also the transportation. But at just the previous speakers mentioned, but maybe in China, the biofuel maybe it's not the higher priorities in China, but we more focus on the hydrogen because the biofuel, they've also faced some of the conflicts, constraints, and for the land supply, and also concern about the, about the food security issues. That is, but the hydrogen and maybe will the more important and with the higher potential in China's for the fuel switching these issues. And the last the options is the sequestering the carbon and in the nature systems for this. So that is the, according to our the modeling exercise, we will find this all these options, they will be the technological is feasible, but we will think about how to remove the market, the barriers, and how to promote and to speed up the deployment in the market for this. So this is our such the pathway, and then all these the 5 options, and they will cover all the important sectors: electricity, building, industry, transportation, and also agriculture, forestry, and the other end-use sectors for this. So that is this is our suggestions for China's carbon neutrality strategies. But I think we cannot only talking about the carbon. That is I remember the ambassador have said he has participated in the Rio meeting and in the 1992. That means they are the environment and development issues together. So that is China's carbon neutrality goal. It also need to fully integrated into we have suggested the modernization strategies. That is include together and to maybe for the people's for the better life the requirement for this. So that is they can get the sustained the momentum for this. So that is I think is very important to integrate our carbon neutrality target and into it's mainstream this target for this. So that is the China government have suggested, we have established, we call it the 1+N, the policy systems. And this is the top level, the design, and from the CPC Central Committee and also from the central government. And then it's based on this, I guess in the early of the next year, then they have the detailed implementation plans for all the sectors, and also have the supporting the systems and to for this. So that is established the policy systems for this. And then is all these the policy systems just as from our environmental economics, and it's from the command control and to the market incentives, and also some encouraging the voluntaries. So there's the very long list of the policies, the list for this. But is today we're also talking about the market mechanism, especially the emission trading systems for this. So that is China also is the higher is the focus on the emission trading systems as the important policies instrument for this. So that is we all know that is this July, the China is the official launch of the national carbon market. It's after the China's national carbon market. That means the global coverage of the carbon market of the CO2 emissions. That is nearly the double. This means the large scale of the China. This is only cover the power sector. That is in the next maybe 2 or 3 years, that will also involve the iron, steel, cement, and also chemical, just like this is the major industry sectors. So that is the larger scales and in the future. And then this is it shows recently maybe currently the carbon price is not very high, but it will be the very good start, and for especially it's towards the end of this year that all the all the, you know, it's the factories, for the power plants, they need to, you know, it's to finish the compliance, and so that is recently, especially today, and it's the total, you know, the market is more the trading, so today's the market for this, and so that means the next step for China's the carbon market, and the State Council, and will pass the regulations, and then they will it's expanding the coverage, and in the next 5 years, and including all the major industry sectors, and then will the stricter the total amount controls the cap, and to match the peaking target, and then will the more, you mean some involve the more the financial products, and also some derivatives, and for this, that, and also, you know, it's some try some the auction the allocations, and then it's want to in the future to you know, it's to maybe the higher the prices, the carbon price in the future. And then, and another issue I need to mention, that is for the carbon neutrality, we also need some new technologies. We must rely. I also remember, Ambassador, that is China. We have some of the science and technologies, especially for the AI and just like this. And these technologies, they can, you know, support the transportation, and also the building, and supporting all the sharing, and also the automotors, some of the economic sectors. So that's, they can change our production life, and also our lifestyle, and they also can help to increase our energy efficiency, cut our energy use, and then they have the significant carbon impact for this. So that is this is from our team, and we also assess all the possible technologies. They are the emission reduction potential, and also they are the marginal abatement cost. So that is the very clear, that is the innovation, the technology needs. That means we also need some policy needs, and for the carbon neutralities for the technology. And this is from the IEA. They also mentioned that is the existing the major technologies can meet the nearly the 60% of the carbon emissions reductions for carbon peak, but only meet the 60% of the reduction needs for the carbon neutrality. That means we all need to, you know, speed up the technology innovations, and to make them the more majors for in the future. Then this is another the futures, the cooperation, the areas between China and Brazil, and for this. So that is the according to our model, we found that, you know, is the higher carbon price can, you know, is can promote and to speed up the cost decline of some the key the low carbon technologies. So that is the, you know, we all know those the technology learning you know, is the learning by doing. That means the more the deployment of technology, that means the faster the decline of the cost. That means and this is the positive the dynamics and for these issues. So that we need to think about how to combine the carbon price, the policies, and also the innovation policy together, and to speed up the last part, that is the, you know, it's the China and Brazil and other the different countries face the very different situation with the other developing countries. So that is, we call this, I guess yesterday Professor Liu also mentioned the ecological the civilizations, the concept of China. That means we think this is the shows we need to, you know, to think in the innovative the development pathways in the future. That means we have the the opportunity, the chance to follow the United States, and even it's very difficult for us to follow the styles for this. So that is the we think in the future we must the further the effort for the to improving our factor efficiency, and that is to seeking the lower the carbons, to supporting our modernizations the target for this. So that is then that means that we identify some key areas for the future cooperation. And the first is, is based on some key technology needs assessment, And then we can talking about some of the joint R&D, some of the technology cooperation, and also some of the technology transfers for this. And the second, I guess the mention that is the infrastructure is very, very important. And from the AIIP, and we have the break the bank, and also need to, infrastructure is very important to avoid the lock-in effect and in the future. And the carbon market is also another. And it's just Ambassador have mentioned the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So I think it is in the future there's the huge cooperations potentials and in the future. Then some the carbon urbanizations, the experience in China, and some the human resources and capacity buildings, and then some the green finance to support the green investment. And then finally, they will thinking about how to combining the climate change, the combating the actions with the SDG. That is, for example, in China have some experience in developing some the PV, and then it's also supporting the poverty, the elevation for this. So that is the long list of the two sides to talking about in the future, and it's also very important. So that means I think the infrastructure is very, very important, because they are I think the China and Brazil as the large European countries also experience urbanization and also expanding the city. That means it still have some needs for the huge infrastructure in the future. So that is we need to establish some clear framework and to some innovations, some policies, some standards, and also some, for example, some investment structures to support the investment on the sustainable infrastructures in the future. So that is another important issues. The last is the technologies. We think that China, I think China have some advantages in the low carbon technologies. So that's especially because China we have very complete the manufacturing systems and cover all the the sub industries and many kinds of the factories. And then the domestic market is very, very large. That is a super large domestic market scales. This is together they can support the EV, wind, solar, and also energy storage, just like these technologies, the development for this. That I see is the more cooperations between China and both the development and also large developing countries like the Brazil. They can significantly reduce the cost of this kind of the technologies and extend the scope of the global market for this kind of technologies and the product. So that is I think they have some win-win opportunities and the benefits for both sides. Then some the priorities that I just mentioned, that EV, wind, solar, and storage, hydrogen, but I just is not very clear that maybe the biofuel. That's so it's but I think is the other I think is more clear. But biofuel is considered about the China's situation, and currently I'm not very clear. But I think anyway I think is very important from the policies and also some standards and also some technologies, and we can have the cooperation potentials and in the future, and also looking forward to the more the discussions and in the future and for these important issues. Oh, that's just mentioned. The Renmin University have launched our academic of the carbon peak and the carbon neutrality. So that means that we hope we can based on this it's the platform and the more the cooperations in the futures and for these issues. Okay, thank you. This is my presentation.